This is the Registered Behavior Technician course presented by Shaza Attar. The course content was created by Shaza Attar and is the property of Autism Therapy and Training, Inc. All rights are reserved. This training program is based on the Behavior Analyst Certification Board 2018 RBT Task List 2nd edition and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. The program is offered independent of the BACB. Remember, in each class, we will have our active listening, a quiz, and a competency assessment. Hi everyone, welcome to today's topic. We'll be discussing communication with stakeholders, another very important topic. So let's get right into it. Firstly, I want to review communication very quickly. Since we've already talked about it in our supervision course, so I won't discuss it in depth. So if you recall, communicating is conveying a message to another person. We want to ensure that we're clear when we communicate with others. We talked about 3 communication types: verbal, nonverbal, and written. I want to go through each one specifically to stakeholders. Remember, we also talked about effective communication. We can convey a message, but if it's not effective, then that message is not being delivered effectively. So you want to learn to listen to the speaker. Don't cut them off as they're talking. You want to be aware of your nonverbal language and, of course, manage your emotions when you talk to others. To be effective, you want to have a clear message, use appropriate language, observe appropriate timing. For example, if you're updating the client about their child and the child is running around the room, you may not be able to convey the message because the listener is focusing on something else. So keep that in mind. Ask questions when appropriate and also consider the audience, client versus an SLP, teacher, and so on. You want to be sure that your message is simple, straightforward, good articulation, and speed. Don't talk too fast and don't talk too slow. Speak in a good volume so that you're heard. This would be specific to verbal communication. When it comes to nonverbal communication, you want to watch your body language. Stay focused on the speaker. When you're communicating with others, be sure you watch your language. Avoid technical language, avoid slang, swear words, and so on. This would not be professional or appropriate. A stakeholder is anyone who has invested interest in the welfare and success of the client. For example, this may be the client's parents, school, professionals involved, such as SLPs and OTs. It could also include government funding agencies and so on. Aim for success every time. And you do that by being prepared. Go into a meeting with notes that you have prepped and review them before the meeting. Have copies for those attending the meeting. You also want to take notes during the meeting so you can go back to your team and review it with them. Here's an example of a note that I might bring with me to a meeting as a therapist or supervisor giving the treatment team a review of what we're working on with the learner. All right, so this is an example of a meeting note that I might bring with me, and this is what I used to do as a therapist. I would be called to a lot of school meetings, and they wanted the therapist working directly with the child to come and speak to a team of people. So we would typically go to the school, and we would meet with the team of people that were working with this child. And so this is an example of a note that I would write up and I would actually bring with me to a meeting, and I would give copies to the people that were there. So usually I would bring, about 5 or 6 copies. And of course, if it wasn't enough, depending on how big the team is, then they would just make copies. But I try to think of, how many people could possibly be there. Typically there's the teacher, the SLP, possibly an OT, and usually someone from the behavior team. It could be, the behavior analyst if they have one. It could also be like a lot of schools have like behavior consultants. So I usually have one for them, and then typically one for the parents because they would also come to these meetings, and of course a copy for myself so I could follow along and go through it. And typically what happens at these meetings is you'll sit around, at a table, and you are you're basically, first you introduce yourselves. So I would say, I'm Shaza, and I'm the therapist working directly with Johnny. Now, as you can see in my note here, I just have JD. I don't really have his name written. And the reason for this is I want to still protect his identity, because if this sheet gets lost, I'm giving it to people that are at this meeting. If they lose this, then, I don't know where it's going to go, and I don't want his personal program information and whatnot to be out there for everybody to see. I don't have personal information about him on here, so it's not necessary for me to write like his name, his date of birth, and all that stuff. It's a simple note, and what I like to do is go by categories. So here, manding. Now, of course, they don't know what manding, tacting, and intraverbals may be. Some may, but, again, I'm talking to a group of people, and I have a whole bunch of stakeholders here. I've got, the teacher, the SLP, the parent. So, but I describe it in my note here. So what I wrote for this is JD is required to ask for a variety of items using a full sentence. He is currently working on, I want to jump on the trampoline. Can I have a turn? Open the bottle, please. He's requesting independently about 40 times per hour. All new targets are prompted, but he masters them very quickly. So this is just a general explanation of his requesting ability. Now, something that you could do here is rather than writing manding, again, you could make it easier for them to understand, and you can say that, this is requesting. Okay. So what I might do is put in requesting, so again they understand what manding is, and I gave them an understanding of what he's doing, the length of the sentence that he's working on, different examples of what he might be doing, and also that he's requesting about 40 times per hour, which is just for them to have an understanding of where he's at, that he's not just asking 2 times per hour, because that would be very low. The next area is tacting. So again, here I might do the same thing and put, labeling. And again, that's to explain to them what it may be. And I said here, JD is working on labeling common items. In the classroom, he's working on pen, chair, and cup. We use the phrase, what is it? And prompt him immediately to respond. This program is new and he is slowly making progress. He has over 45 labels of items acquired. Our goal is to achieve 100 common items. So again, if I was in the meeting, I would really review what that phrase says, and I would, or that paragraph says, and then I would talk to them about how many, he's acquired, and even the purpose of it, so they understand, because they may not know why we're working on these labeling common items. Again, I would give them a little explanation. It's always good for you to understand why you're working on certain programs, so that if you did have to explain it to anybody, you could. And then, our goal is to reach, let's say, 100 common items. All right, let's move on. So the intraverbal, here I wrote, again, if you were speaking at the meeting, you want to speak clearly, you want to speak at a good volume and pace. And I would say JD is currently working on animal sounds. The goal of this program is to teach him to respond to simple WH questions. This program is taught in discrimination, which is presenting the WH questions about animals with other questions such as what color, what number, what is it. This is so that he does not memorize the responses and is able to answer a variety of WH questions. So here again, I explained, what the program is, the focus of that discrimination, but I also explain what that discrimination is, because they may not know what you mean by that. and I gave them an example so that they have a clear understanding of what we're teaching and what we're doing. Now, they might have specific questions that they ask you at a meeting. Again, the client may ask you specific questions if you're doing a client meeting. And so you want to be prepared to answer those kinds of questions. And if you don't have the answer, just say, I'm not really sure about that question or what the response is to that question. Let me speak to my supervisor and get back to you. If you have a business card, you can give that to them so that you guys can correspond, or maybe do a phone call after, or maybe your supervisor can call them to give them an explanation as to what's going on or why, or whatever the question may be in regards to that program. Here, let's say another program is play. JD is also working on playing interactively with peers. He's working on board games such as Snakes and Ladders. Our primary focus now is to get him to attend to his peers when they prompt him to say, "Your turn." Again, very simple. It's to the point. If they don't know what Snakes and Ladders, the game is, and they ask you, can you tell us about that game or what you do? Or they might ask you, how are you prompting him right now to attend to his peer? Because we find that he's not really attending to his peers when they try to get his attention. And so you might explain how you're currently doing that, which would mean that you would have to know what the teaching procedure is. And again, that would be on that skill acquisition plan that you guys have in place for him. Two things that I usually like to add onto these notes. One is problem behaviors, because every school, every SLP, OT, teacher, they want to know what problem behaviors are happening, how you deal with it, and the success of it. A lot of the times, they're also seeking that information and support, and we like to work along with the school. So we want to help them because we want the learner to be successful in all environments. So here, for example, I gave that JD hits his peers from time to time. He will often hit them when he wants a toy. When he hits a peer, he is put in a timeout for 1 minute. He was hitting his peers around 15 to 20 times per day, but now the hits have decreased to 4 to 6 times per day. And I should probably put times here, per day. Now, when we're looking at problem behavior and how we're addressing it, if they wanted to run this protocol there, then I would really have that protocol on hand. Sometimes schools like to do that, but we want to be very clear as to what things mean, like that he's being put in timeout. Well, where is he being put in timeout? You could describe that, like they might ask you, like, oh, so what do you guys, do? Well, once he engages in the hitting, we remove him from his peers and the reinforcing, place, and he sits on a chair, about 3 or 4 feet away from everything and everybody, and he sits, but he's still in the classroom. He's not removed outside of the classroom. And again, it's specific to hitting peers for when he, wants a toy of some sort. So he might be reaching or grabbing for a toy. And again, I would maybe define what wants means to them. But I think what's important here, and this happened a long time ago, where we were using a timeout procedure for self-injurious behaviors, and we were very successful in decreasing the problem or the self-injurious behavior to 0 levels. And we were talking to the school about it, and they were really happy because they had noticed that the self-injurious behaviors had decreased as well. And then, a few weeks later, I find out that the school is putting this little guy in timeout for everything. If he spat, if he screamed a little bit, if he, whatever it was that he did, he was in timeout for everything. And the mom was really bothered by that. She's like, he's in timeout for everything. And so, we went back to the school and said, it's better for you to define one behavior that you're tackling, but don't put him in timeout for everything, because timeout may not be the solution for that. It was effective for this. And so again, working along with those teams to really explain the procedure that you're using, and really clarifying that they should really speak to their behavioral team as well, and put something in place based on the function not just because it worked for self-injurious behavior. So again, having those conversations with the school and with the people that do work with the individual is important. Lastly, one of the things I really like to put on these is reinforcers. So things that they like. So they like to play with trains, cars, slime, Play-Doh, whatever it is that the individual likes. Again, if I'm speaking specifically here about children. I'm speaking here specifically about children, but you might be working with teens or adults, and sharing what they like is important, because then that person can say, oh, wow, we've never thought of pulling out trains, or, we don't even have slime and Play-Doh here in our environment. Maybe we should get some. And these are great things that you could share with other stakeholders that are, working with the client, so that they can improve the quality of intervention and therapy. Suppose I was attending a school meeting. They often want to know where things are at. Here's how I would review it with the team and how I would speak to them. So this is, again, just an example of a note that I would bring to a meeting. I would have copies of this. Again, you want to remember that it's well written. When I'm going through it, I don't want to talk too fast. I don't want to use technical words. I want to explain what's on here, and I want to be prepared for questions. And when I'm answering these questions, I want to really think about the question that's coming at me. And if I know the response, great. If I don't, I'm just going to let them know that I'm going to speak to my supervisor, and we'll get back to them on a response to that. Again, having a way to communicate with the school or the other stakeholders involved, whether it's through email, whether it's phone calls, always get consent. Remember that, get consent first, and then you can start communicating with that individual. And just, again, always just think about protecting the identity of your clients, so that you're protecting their privacy. As you are in the meeting talking to everyone, or if it's one-on-one with the client, avoid excessive talking and rambling on, and watch their body language. Often I see clients looking away, looking around the room, and that may signal to the speaker that they're losing interest. Be sure you have a back and forth, sharing some information and asking them about how the learner is in their environment in this area, so that it's a back and forth conversation between you and them. When you're providing caregivers a verbal update of the client's day, use a sandwich approach. Start with something positive. You can discuss a concern if there is one, and end the conversation on a positive note. Don't let the client walk away feeling worried or stressed about something. Rather, end it well for them, so that it's not the last thing that was said to them. Another thing to be mindful of is don't talk about the future or ask questions about the future, such as, do you think he's going to progress? Do you think he'll ever get a job? None of us can answer these kinds of questions. And asking a parent a question like that, coming from you, is very difficult, because they hear it as you giving up on their child. A therapist once did that, and it truly broke the client's heart. She wanted the therapist fired immediately. So keep that in mind. Talk about the here and now. You may be required to write communication logs and mini reports to the client about their child, or a progress report for a client you work with that needs to be submitted to your supervisor. This is an example of what we would write here at the center. Of course, each place is different, but what's important is writing a report or communication log with clarity. Be sure not to ramble about things. Be simple and to the point. We like to share actual data so that the client can see the progress. Here's an example. All right, so I'm going to walk you through how to write a communication log. And the key here is writing things effectively and getting the message across appropriately. The thing that I want you to really focus on is, one, you want to make sure your grammar and syntax is good, you're using capitals and periods, and things like that. You also want to ensure that you're writing it in a simple way so that the client can understand. So this is a template of what we would use here at our center. Now again, you might be using something different. You might just have a generic, paragraph that you just write on on a piece of paper, and that's how you guys do it. I like to have a template so it reminds therapists of what to do. The other thing is, it allows therapists to focus on certain areas and then talk about it. So I'm going to walk you guys through how we write one of these, and then you can use that for your own practice, or you can implement something like this if you could. So here I'm going to write the learner's name. So it's going to be Johnny, and I'm going to use today's date. Let's just say November 16th, 2019. I'm the supervisor, and let's just say the RBT is Jenny. So she's put her name, so this is the person writing it. Now what we like to do is focus on writing about 2 programs that are currently running. And every 2 weeks we would switch up the program so that the client isn't reading about the same program every single time, that we're switching it up. We also don't want to write about all the programs, because if the child has, let's say, 10 programs running, that's a really long report, and we don't want that. We don't want the client reading a 12-page, communication log. We want them to read something just to give them, a little update as to where things are at with their learner. Or their child. So I'm going to write about Johnny, and he's currently, let's say, working on an interverbal program. Let's say it's animal sounds, and I'm going to talk about this one. So Johnny is currently working on animal sounds. His targets are cow, dog, and cat, let's say. The purpose of this program is to ask him, what does a animal say, and he will respond with the correct animal sound. For example, if we ask, what does a dog say? He will say, woof. Okay, so I've described, instead of me saying I'm working on an intraverbal program, that may not be simple for the client to understand. They may not know what an intraverbal is. So I'm going to just talk about what the program is. So Johnny's currently working on animal sounds. His targets are cow, dog, and cat. The purpose of the program is to ask him, what does whatever the animal is, what do they say, and he will respond with the correct animal sound. For example, if we ask, and so I'm going back, so I reread what it is that I wrote, because often when we're writing, we might, put an extra space, or we might spell things incorrectly, or we might forget a tense, or whatever it might be, and you want to go back and reread what you've written so that you can correct that. So Johnny's currently working on animal sounds. His targets are cow, dog, and cat. The purpose of this program is to ask him, what does an animal say? And he will respond with the correct animal sound. For example, if we asked, what does a dog say? He will say, woof. Okay, so again, I'm paying attention to capitalizations. The other thing that I want you guys to pay attention to is not saying his name every single time. So, Johnny is currently working on animal sounds. Johnny's targets are, Johnny will respond with you don't want to keep saying his name, because then that becomes too redundant. So make sure that it flows, make sure that it makes sense. If you're not sure, read it to somebody else and see if they understand, what is written. The last thing that we like to do is provide where the progress is at currently. So typically what we do, if we're taking percentage data, is we might take the last 3 days and give an average of what the percentage is. So I might say something like, in the last 3 days, he has been averaging about, let's say it was 75%, which is good. And obviously we want to get to, let's say, 80% before he masters the target. And that's that. So then I might write about a second program. I like to share about 2 programs, like I said, so that it gives them something to read. So let's suppose Johnny's working on a TAC program, and he's tacting common items in the environment. So Johnny is currently labeling common items in his environment, such as, let's say he's doing pen, chair, and cup. Okay, so these are his current targets. Again, I didn't say tacting, I said labeling, because I'm speaking to the client here. I want them to understand what it is. So Johnny is currently labeling common items in his environment, such as pen, chair, and cup. I like to write the purpose of the program so the client understands. We want them to understand, for example, like with the interverbal, maybe that we're building up those conversational skills. So I could have written something like that. With the labeling program, the purpose of it may be to build up their vocabulary, and that's what we're starting to do. So the purpose of this, whoopsie daisy, of this program is to build his vocabulary. Vocabulary. And I can't spell today. His vocabulary. So the purpose of this program is to build his vocabulary. And he has been averaging about, let's say it's 55%. Okay. So this might be a lower percentage. Now I might look at the data to see, why is it so low? Should I be concerned? Should I speak to my supervisor? And I actually like the therapist to write this. So he's been averaging about 55% in the last 3 days. This program was recently introduced, and the targets are new. So I might explain that if, let's say, the program just started and it's only been, a couple of weeks or a week or whatever it may be, that 55% may be low because it's a new program and he's still learning it and the targets are new. Sometimes when you have new targets, even if a program's been running for, some time, but you keep adding new targets, the percentage is going to drop. Or they may not gain skills. So if you're doing cumulative data, then you may not see that gain right away. And so it takes, a week or so before we can actually acquire some targets and that you can write that down. If the percentage is low, but it's been running for a while, and then you might write something like, the program's been running for a couple of weeks and we're in communication, or we've been talking to the supervisor about some revisions. Again, letting the client know that you guys are attending to the lack of progression or the slow progression so that something is happening. The next section that we like to talk about is things like group, circle time, snack time, self-help skills, and daily routine. So anything that you might want to write here. So if you if there's a new program that was added, we could talk about it here. Maybe how they're sitting in circle time. So let's take a look at, circle time here. So Johnny is currently sitting for circle time. Circle time is 15 minutes long. He will sit with a reinforcer in hand and look at the lead therapist running the group. He will often sing along and raise his hand to answer a question. All right. So that might be, what's happening during circle time. So again, you want to write it in observable and measurable terms. You want to write it in a way that the client can almost imagine, what he's doing in circle time. Again, you want to reread what you wrote because, I was just writing it now, but I may have made a mistake while I was writing it. So Johnny's currently sitting for circle time. Circle time is 15 minutes long. He will sit with a reinforcer in hand and look at the lead therapist running the group. He will often sing along and raise his hand to answer a question. So that's good. If we're done here, we can go on to the next section. Here we like to look at any concerns, challenging behavior, or possibly even general improvements. We don't always have to look for the things that aren't going well. Sometimes there's just general improvements that you want to talk about. But if there was a concern here, then you might want to bring it up to the parent. Of course, always speak to your supervisor so you know how to word these, because this can be very sensitive when it comes to addressing these kinds of issues. So let's suppose that Johnny engages in some problem behaviors, and he, let's say has been hitting peers, and the parents know that he's engaging in this kind of behavior. So let's talk about it. So Johnny engages in problem behaviors in the form of hitting peers. We might even specify that it's actually aggression and not just problem behavior. Now, again, that depends on how your supervisor labels it, but because it's hitting peers, we would be really looking at aggression here. So Johnny engages in aggression in the form of hitting peers. In the last 3 days, his behavior has decreased from 15 hits per day to 4 per day, which is a great improvement. The protocol in place is a timeout procedure, let's say. All right, so the protocol in place is a timeout procedure. Now, again, before we put in any procedure in place, the client should have signed on this and given consent, so they should know that there's a timeout procedure. But again, as a reminder as to what it is that's helped decrease the behavior is maybe that timeout procedure. So something like that, again, would be helpful. Now, we want to look at the flow of the written work, that it's simple to read. Anyone can really read this. It's clear. I'm not, sometimes I'll see therapists will, write something and then they'll do something like this. Let's say this was my sentence, and they'll do this. And then they'll write and then they'll put a period. And so, this would not be the correct way of how we put a period after, a word. So, pay attention to little things like that. Don't ever do something like this and write Johnny's name with a lowercase. That should always be an uppercase. So things like that you just want to attend to. Again, you want to make sure that it's clearly written. It's, this is pretty simple to read. Again, if you're not sure, read it to somebody else and see if they understand it. I really haven't used any technical terms. It's pretty straightforward. Now, when it comes to, we also put reminders and changes. We like to share any changes that happen at the center. So if a new therapist is working with the child, we want to let the parents know. If there's a classroom change, we want to let the family know. Any reminders. So if we are doing, for example, a Remembrance Day thing or a Halloween thing or a Christmas thing, we might tell them, don't forget to do this, or maybe they need to send in some more diapers. We might put that reminder here. So that's something that you can put here. So we are running low on diapers. If you could please send some more. All right, so something like that. If they're working with new therapists, then you can let them know as well. So Johnny will be working with a new RBT. Her name is Sarah. And again, I just like the families to know who's, what changes have been happening here at the center. And then the last part of it, which I think is really important, is skills to work on at home. So if we do a lot of things here, but we want the therapist to tell the parents to maybe work on something that they can do at home. Again, something easy. So let's say that, Johnny's eye contact has really improved here. I want to give them something that he's improved on here that we're generalizing into the home environment, not necessarily something for them to teach them in that environment. So Johnny's eye contact has improved significantly. When he requests an item, wait until he looks at you before you give the item. Whoops, and then I made a little boo-boo, gonna go back, fix it. Oh, found another boo-boo, oopsie, gonna fix that. So Johnny's eye contact has improved significantly. When he requests an item, wait until he looks at you before you give the item. So again, you want to reread what you wrote, you want to fix any mistakes, and then, then you're good to go. I like to have the girls get it approved by their supervisor before they send it off to the client. It's nice to have a second eye to look at these things, again, because you want to make sure that it's written well, there's no errors. The last thing that you want is to send a communication log that is grammatically incorrect, or there's a lot of spelling mistakes. Again, the client will look at it and say, is this person really having a hard time spelling? Do they not know how to spell? Then, are they a really good educator or healthcare professional for my child, or for my, for the individual that they're working with? So be sure to have someone look at it. I like to do that here, and then typically I'll sign off on it. We'll PDF it, and then we'll send it off and password protect it and send it off to the client. Some of these may get sent to teachers. They might get shared with an SLP or an OT. So again, think about who they're being shared with. So you want it to be professional and be well written, because it's representing you and, of course, the organization that you work for. When you're communicating with other professionals, be professional, be sure you have consent first, be prepared. Don't criticize their work or their approach, even if you don't like it. Be confident when you speak with them. Again, be clear and concise. Some conversations may occur over the phone. Having good phone etiquette is important. Don't interrupt others. Be professional. Smile. Although they can't see you, they can definitely hear it in your voice when you're smiling. Sometimes you may have casual conversations with stakeholders. This may happen in the hall or elevator. Beware of what you say or what you're talking about. Be aware of who's around you. These can sometimes violate a person's privacy, so you want to be respectful not to share things that someone else can overhear. This would be the same if you were giving a client an update at the end of the day. Be aware of those standing in the lobby area that they're not listening in. Your responsibility as an RBT is to ensure that you're not giving promises to the client on things that you can't promise. You can't promise that the child's going to progress or the client's going to progress. Again, we can only talk about the here and now. The other thing that you want to ensure that you're not doing is changing the intervention. You might think that, a child needs a different protocol in place, or maybe a different program in place. Don't tell the client that you're going to be changing things and actually change them. Always speak to your supervisor. And lastly, you don't want to give advice outside of your own competency. Often, sometimes parents or the client may ask you questions at the door if you're, handing off the learner to them, and they might ask you questions about what to do at home, or things from, that day-to-day kind of interactions that are going on. And you might have some input to give them, and you want to be sure that you're giving advice that is within your competency. But don't give advice that's outside of your competency. You can let the client know that you're going to speak to your supervisor and find out, maybe their ideas and thoughts, and then come back to them with that. What is effective communication? A, talking to others. B, conveying a message clearly. C, telling people what to do. D, all of the above. And the correct response is B, conveying a message clearly. Who is a stakeholder? A, parents. B, teachers. C, other professionals. Or D, all of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. What are some types of communication? A, nonvocal, B, verbal, C, telepathic, D, A and B only, or E, none of the above. And the correct response is B, verbal. What are some types of communication? A, nonverbal, B, verbal, C, written, or D, all of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. My final thoughts. Communicating with anybody is crucial. Conveying that message clearly is important. And whoever you're speaking to, you want to keep the audience in mind. If you're speaking to the client, you want to ensure that you're speaking in a simple way, some way that they can understand you with ease. You also need to adjust the way that you're speaking to the client based on language barriers. So if they're first language is not English and they have a hard time understanding it, you want to be sure that you're simplifying the language so that you can convey that message clearly to them. You also want to, in general, be professional when speaking to anybody, whether it's your supervisor, other professionals, or even your coworkers. Again, you can get very comfortable with your coworkers, and you might end up becoming too friendly with them and lose that professional boundary. You want to remember to keep that professional boundary with them and that professional language. Don't use slang and swear words. Get swear words out of your vocabulary at all times. And I even think sometimes you have to just get rid of them, because sometimes you can say, well, I can do that at home. But it can quickly slip into your work environment and could be a big problem for you. So be sure that you're communicating clearly, effectively. Listen, and listen well. Often when a speaker is talking, we're already thinking about things and how to respond to it. Take a moment to really take in what the individual is saying, listen, and then you can say whatever it is that you need to say in that moment, or ask questions. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you at our next class.